Hi, welcome to Civic Engagement Online Summer 2016. My name is Jamie Cohen. I know you guys know me, but I figured I'd reiterate in case somebody random is watching on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about some of the parts of the way the class works and our first lecture. It's going to be pretty short as far as the lecture goes, but it's going to connect some of the information that you may not have received in some of the videos. It also represents a third of what the online class is going to be focusing on, which is climate change. Now this is for a very specific reason. The reason is because this class, in the physical portion, isn't far different than the online version. In the online version, we do a lot more of your reading and a lot more of your viewing, whereas in the physical version, I'd be showing you a lot of this material in class, but also speaking about it to connect some of the dots. In this online version, a lot of this is on you, which means that you're going to have to do the readings yourself and also communicate in a way that I understand you watched it and understand the material. The rules of class are pretty simple. I mean, I sent you an email and it's in there. You have to do all the readings and all the viewings. That's for your benefit more than mine. That's to fill in all the blanks of not being in class. It's self-guided. That's what online courses are. So by watching the material, you should be able to get a pretty good grasp of where I'm going with this and the 3 different points. So with the vlogs, that's part of an online expression. Normally in an in-class session, you'd be doing 4 vlogs. Because it's online, you'll be doing 3, but you'll also be supplementing with other material such as quizzes and modules and so forth. That's for me to understand that you get what we're doing. The vlogs are pretty simple, but they're very important to understand that there's a rubric to them, a very specific rubric. And the rubric is they have to be exactly 3 minutes. Now that sounds like, oh, that's not a big deal. But that means you're thinking of it as in the terms of a term paper or some way that you're following the rules. You also have to follow the rubric that I'm going to send out, which is to make sure you did the research on the material. And that's important because I gave you the material, so all you have to do is reference that by quoting it, saying it, or speaking it. So you have to make at least 1 or 2 references to the material, sort of like a quote inside of a paper. But you'll also have to make sure that you're explaining it, articulating it to a public. And I mean public because you're going to have to post these videos on YouTube publicly. And that means you're explaining it to a group of people that will have to understand that you are now the expert on the material. But more important than being the expert on the material, it is that you are being civically engaged. To be civically engaged is very important in today's era. As you've seen over the last 2 weeks, we've seen a lot of strife and a lot of combative nature in social media spaces. People use social media spaces to emote and to express, and that's extremely important. That's why I love it. That's why you should love it. But it's also important to understand that people, by having the democratic access of saying whatever they want, means that they often say things that are more passionate and emotional rather than factual. And usually, the people that are more emotional often win. And the people that are often more emotional, by winning, show that being emotional means that it stands as a higher ground than something that's factual. This is why the first lecture is about climate change, because climate change is one of these emotional topics, whereas it's not. It's a scientific topic. So, let me tell you why it's important to be articulating first. So one of the most important things is that if you are becoming the expert in a certain topic, you don't just appear as somebody who is understanding of it, but somebody who's willing to take a stand, somebody who's willing to take a point of view on something. And that's really what these vlogs are about, is that you're going to take a point of view. So let me go over the climate change information first, and then I'll go into the more of the civic matters of the issues. First off, the year's 2016. That is 7 years ago now. Bill McKibben, the writer of 350 and 350.org, spoke in front of the Senate, and he said to the Senate in 2009, we have a very short time ahead of us. If we don't make certain changes in carbon emissions in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to witness the end of the world during our lifetime. Now that sounds incredibly dystopic, and it sounds incredibly hyperbolic, and it is. I mean, hyperbole is important when you're trying to get these things across. But I think the hyperbole there is a little too strong because it doesn't really mean the end of the world as we exist. It doesn't mean human extinction, although Naomi Klein would say that we are heading towards a 6th extinction. And that includes a lot of animals as well as ourselves. Now here's what's important, is that when he says it's the end of the world during our lifetime, what we're actually watching is the end of our world. Our world, the world that humans have existed on for approximately 250,000 to 300,000 years as Homo sapiens, and where bipedal thinking creatures have been around for about 3 million years. That world is coming to a very abrupt change in the very near future. And I mean near future. As in when I say 250,000 years, I don't mean that into the future. I mean like the next 100 or 200 years where everything will change. And I'm speaking about this in a very factual way. This isn't something that's debatable. Climate change is real, and we take the stance in this class that it is real. 99.2% of all scientists believe it's real. That constitutes approximately 5,000 scientists. There are approximately 30 to 40 scientists which believe that it could be natural, or that it could be something that is a phase or moving through and cyclical. That said, Earth is cyclical. It does go through phases. It changes all the time. Technically, we're still in an ice age. That ice age ended approximately 10,000 years ago-ish, but it doesn't mean we're out of that ice age, which means we could cycle back into it. So we are inside of these big cycles. But why do we always hear 50-50 on the issue? Why do we always hear that it could be... Why is it always that it could be real or it could be false? Well, that has to do with traditional media, not new media. In traditional media, journalism, which is the background story of most of this, journalism has to be fair and balanced. Now, fair and balanced means you give each side equal time. And by giving equal time, that's fair and balanced. But that means if there's two sides of the coin, you represent both. That's fairly important in journalism. You want to make sure that you're not representing one side or another. But when it comes to something like climate change, they give equal time to those on each side. Even if you had a room of two people that were saying that, or one person that says climate change is a hoax or unreal, 99 people would have to represent the other side. John Oliver did a pretty good interpretation of this. The link is below. So, what you should understand is that from this point of view, climate change is something that's happening. So let me give you a little short history of deep time, which everybody knows who's taken class with me. I love deep time. My background and my future is media archaeology. I didn't know it was media archaeology until recently, but now I'm in a PhD that deals with media archaeology. Media archaeology is looking at how we deal with new media into the future, and I mean the far future. To sum it up quite simply, when you have your cell phone in front of you, you have a device that is made up of material that are geologic in time. There's gold in there. There's bromide and chromium, a mineral. The mineral is millions of years old. It was dug from the earth. It was literally, the earth was deformed to make your phone. Now, what's more interesting is that you record data, just like I'm recording information onto this GoPro. This GoPro's card, the little chip that's inside of it, is made up of those same materials. Now, who's to say that in 1,000 years that card will work? Who's to say that card will work in 10 years from now? Media changes so rapidly. So what we're looking at now is this waste, this e-waste of these little data materials that end up way into the future and that are literally chips. But are they readable? Do we know if that's something that we can interpret 20 years from now? Does digital memory even exist? The questions that are included that have a lot to do with the Anthropocene. So there's a new word for you, Anthropocene. So that's Anthropocene is the era we are in. The era we are in, the Anthropocene, is recently coined in January of this year. Again, link below, read that article. The Anthropocene is an era, and geologic eras are made of deep time. It's to understand where we are in the geological scale of time. So to sum up really quickly, about 4.6 billion years ago, a bunch of the space goop got together and gravity created a mass that sucked in other space goop and slammed into each other till it became about the size of Earth. Eventually something mega-sized hit Earth, bounced off of it, that's our moon. So now we have two objects floating around in space orbiting a sun. Now that sun is pretty old, I'm not sure of its age, but I do know the universe is about 14 billion years old. So when you say numbers that are 14 billion or look at numbers that are like 3.6 billion, you're looking at a long scale of time. That is way before humans existed. It took about 2 billion years before life forms started to appear after the cooling of the earth and plants started appearing. Plants sucked in all of the CO2, produced oxygen. Oxygen plus CO2 equals our atmosphere. Gravity and our poles hold together our atmosphere, so we actually have a greenhouse, a place where things can grow. Approximately 2 billion years ago, higher life forms started appearing by multicellular objects. And about somewhere over 1 billion years, we have the breathing animals, and then we're going to jump way ahead and look at the video below, the Business Insider video that gives you a long scale of how long deep time is. Understand that deep time means that we are very close to the present. So 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, all the continents were one, Pangea. That's how soon ago that the continents were that way. Over the last 65 million years, they've spread apart, and within the last 3 million, mammals in the simian zone have started to figure out how to do Stone Age tools. That means literally breaking tools off to become sharp, to use tools for that. Now, tool making is incredibly important. That is a mutation of the brain. Generation after generation, those mutations create higher thinking objects. Once they've done that, the beings become more able to move forward. Now, let's jump ahead again. 3.9 million years. And we end up at around the time of the birth of the Neanderthal and Homo africanus and the Homo sapien. Around 250,000 years ago, the Homo sapien wasn't the lone thinker on Earth. There's Neanderthals as well and several others. But what Homo sapiens did, which was take the ideas of the other beings. Neanderthals invented fire. Homo sapiens perfected it. And in that time, they either bred them out or killed them to become the only last living thinking bipedal organism on Earth. And here we are. Now we jump ahead to about 10,000 years ago. The glaciers started retreating. They stopped, and then they started peeling back. This is about the time the Long Island Sound was invented. The Long Island Sound is a huge glacier hole, and underneath Long Island is the remnant of a glacier, and that's where the aquifer is that we get our water from. So you could tell that that's how recent ago we are to the Ice Age. When people have to stop moving because the Ice Age was so intense, people could start creating civilization. And by civilization, they start manufacturing landscapes. And to manufacture a landscape is what all humans do. They take care of their own land, they make it and form it, and it is their place. So humans create their environment. Civilization appears, language becomes codified, people become civilized, so to speak, and civilized being that they are part of a civilization, and then they start building. And once they start building, the manufactured landscapes become something that they can't lose. Then armies appear, domestication of animals before this, domestication of plants, and so forth, until about 2,000 years ago when empires had hit their peak. Rome hits its peak at around 200 AD, which, thanks to hubris and a lot of different powers, collapses. And then over the course of the last 1,000 years, we end up in the Renaissance. And after the Renaissance, we discover deep time in the 1830s during the Enlightenment, which gives us the birth of Romanticism. Romanticism leads us to the idea that culture can also exist with science. And when we end up creating weapons. Now, we've had gunpowder for nearly 700 years. We've had throwing weapons for about 10,000. But the Anthropocene appears on a very specific time, July 16th, 1945. July 16th, 1945 is the beginning of the era of the Anthropocene. And here's how we'll know. If you were to dig down several hundred feet, you would move through the strata of Earth. That strata tells us what the weather was like on each layer. So if we move back 100 years, you could tell maybe there's a volcano at that point. If you move back 1,000, you could tell there was a drought. The rocks tell the story of Earth. Now, if you will go forward from here 10,000 years, you'll notice that there's a layer at a certain point, just appears out of nowhere, of atomic energy. Somehow, atomic energy has fallen down and created a layer of dirt mixed with the atomic energy. That is the era of the Anthropocene. From that point forward, we know humans were here. If all else fails, there's no way to know if humans had any impact. If all goes wrong and we lose all of our history, a la Wall-E. But what we do know is that a geologist can figure out that man-made atomic energy is somewhere scattered in the air. Since July 16, 1945, we've exploded well over 2,200 atomic bombs, we being the human race, all over the planet. North Korea just blew up an atomic bomb a couple of weeks ago. So it happens very consistently. But that creates atomic energy in the air that kind of scatters, pretty harmless to us over the course of our entire lives just because of the dissipation, but not harmless to the Earth itself. Now, that is not connected to climate change itself. What climate change represents is actually overabundance of CO2 in the air. Check the link on this one because there will be a video here so you can see it, but make sure that you check what it looks like in the era of climate change. What it is that over the course of the last 100 years, or last 10 years, there's now more parts per million of CO2 than ever before. And I don't mean like haha joking, ever before as in ever before. I mean like since there was lava on the planet 3.6 billion years ago. Have we ever seen this much carbon in the air? This much carbon in the air is a vicious cycle. The more there is, the more it becomes a greenhouse. The more it's a greenhouse, the more it becomes melting. I just got back from Iceland, which I was very fortunate to get to go see, and I saw what climate change looks like up there. you saw it in Chasing Ice, and it was real. It took about 100 years for the glacier to recede about 2 miles from the ocean, and then it took about 10 years for it to recede another mile. And what happens when it recedes that rapidly is the ground is very undulated because it's receding too fast. Glaciers flatten the Earth, which is why Long Island's so flat, by the way. And what happens is if it moves too fast, it creates like hills and rocks are spilled all over the place. So it's not a cooling in that way. But it also does something incredibly crazy for us, which is it creates glacier melt. Glacier melt is sea level rising. There is a guarantee at this point, Bill McKibben is right, that by the late 21st century, so by the end of this century, the water will definitely be 9 feet higher. That means if you are living in Long Beach or in the South Shore, 9 feet of water is pretty high. That's a guarantee. So if you're in Babylon, that means there will be water consistently above, right up to about Montauk Highway. If you're on Long Beach, there is no Long Beach. So by the end of the century, Long Beach is flooded. There is just no more. Same with Atlantic City. It's just too low. Now, that's best case scenario. Worst case scenario is the full glacier melt. That's where all the glaciers melt by the end of the 2200. That's 45 feet of water. 45 feet. Now, a 45-foot sea level rise means that it will lead to about the Appalachian Mountains in New Jersey. So it really does flood a fair amount all the way out to losing most of our coastline for quite some time. And what I mean by quite some time is about 10,000 more years. So we have to understand that this is happening. These are best case scenarios that we only have 9 feet by the end of the century. Many people believe that by the end of the century we're looking at about 35 feet. But these are proven. Check the link below for the map. There's a map comparison that shows best and worst case scenarios. That's a study that was done during the release of the knowledge of the Anthropocene. On that knowledge, we realized that there is not much of a choice of not having water. It's how much water we're going to get, a lot or a little, because we're getting it regardless. So now why is this class and this information so important to you? And that's because this matters. This matters intensely because it's become a political issue, which to me is like phenomenal when you think about it, because how is this a political issue when this is literally the destruction of Earth? This is literally how things go away. We can't have nice things. This is a political issue because who does it benefit? I'll give you a second. Why does it benefit somebody to not have to fix the carbon emissions? Well, the oil companies don't want us to fix it. Oil is our biggest commodity. Fossil fuels, so named because they are drawn from fossils, trees, coal, fossilized animals, oil, and we have fossil fuels that are the biggest industry on Earth. If we were to go away from using fossil fuels or carbon emission products, we would lose a large chunk of the economy. So it becomes a question of, do we allow ourselves to work around an economy base and work towards the better of the future, or understand that we're doomed at this point. We are moving towards a doom scenario, a different way of life. You may not die, but it's a different way of life. Now, Naomi Klein would say we're moving towards a sixth extinction, which we are. It's another large die-off of animals is going to happen in the next century as well. Entire ecosystems will fall apart by this change. When the glaciers melt, they don't just melt and leave water. They also do something known as a belch. I know that's funny, but what happens is glaciers are like the Earth. Geologic time has been compressed in there too, which means during different climate changes, the ice got so cold that it kept methane captured inside of the layers of the ice. And now, when captured in that ice, when the ice melts to a certain level, a belch happens. All the gases go out at once, and you saw this in Chasing Ice. So what do you have to do? What's important for you? You could use this topic for the global change topic. You don't have to, but the global change topic is to talk about something that isn't being spoken about. If you've been keeping up with the election, which I hope you have been, you'll notice that climate change has not been spoken about. Not even clear why, to be honest with you. It's sort of like there's certain topics on each election that just aren't spoken about. In 2008, Guantanamo Bay wasn't spoken about, neither by McCain nor Obama. Now in 2016, neither Clinton nor Trump are speaking about climate change. Trump brings it up every so often and says it's a hoax by the Chinese. Clinton brings it up every so often and says that it is real and it is important, but neither of them are debating on this or using this as platform material, which is sad, because this is our Earth. We only get one, and as a people, when you really look at it in the long scale of things, this political race doesn't really matter if we destroy the Earth. So shouldn't this matter? So what you should do as a civic-minded individual is tell people about this. Help them understand it. Watch this material, get it, and really try to gather an idea of a point of view that you should go with. What I need you to do as you're in this, and you'll see this in the description below and also on the canvas itself, is that I want you to discuss this a little bit as a point of view. I want you to take a stance. And all I want you to do is just give me a little bit of what you feel or what you've learned from this and what you feel as if you could do to help other people understand this. Helping other people understand climate change helps us become better at living in the Anthropocene, and in that sense, dying in the Anthropocene, which means we're going to be in our lives, we're going to live through these massive changes. Right now, we're just sitting in this summer's been pretty pleasant, but we're going to see in the next few years is a lot more mega storms, a lot more droughts, and a lot more fires across the earth. You're going to see a lot more changes that are larger than ever before. They'll seem not too big at first, and then as time goes on, you'll notice that those 100-year storms or those 500-year storms like Sandy are going to happen quite consistently. And that's scary because that's where we live. That's our lives. That's how we enjoy ourselves. But you'll notice, and if you pay attention and think about it a lot, you'll notice that you already have seen changes. You just don't notice them because you don't see growth when you see it with your eyes. But there's certain smells we don't have anymore. Literally, some things that from your childhood, these certain flowers or certain smells of summer are gone. You may not recognize it unless you travel. And you'll go to a certain area and be like, oh my gosh, that smells familiar. That's something that I remember from my childhood. Why don't I smell that anymore? And that's because just in the last 15 years, last 30 years, last 50 years, last 75 years, everything's changed so rapidly that things have already changed right before us. Not just technology, but life itself. It's our responsibility to take care of the planet. It's our responsibility to become informed citizens of this planet. Read the material, watch the clips, and become informed on this issue. Because to me, this is my most important issue as a media archaeologist, but it should also be yours because we live on Long Island. And by living here, we're part of a place that is going to have rapid changes moving to the future. We should be doing something.